Hey friends, my name is Mo. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are going to be talking about 10 books that scare me. So these are all going to be fiction books that are intimidating to me for one reason or another. If you hear random noises in the background, it's my cat. She's wants attention. Don't worry, she's getting it. I'm petting her. But the first book I want to talk about is kind of actually two books in one. So this is one bind up, and on one side it is The Hours by Michael Cunningham, and then on the other side it is Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. So first off, I'm going to be so transparent with you. I bought this book because it was pretty. I wanted to read Mrs. Dalloway eventually in my lifetime, but the main reason I bought this is because it's gorgeous. It's got this matte white cover with these pressed flowers on it, and all of the writing is in gold. It is gorgeous. But basically this is a bind up of the two novels. Mrs. Dalloway is a classic novel by Virginia Woolf that basically follows Mrs. Dalloway as she is going about her life, kind of preparing for this party. So it's kind of just like an introspective internal monologue of her preparing for this party, her thoughts and opinions. The Hours is a more recent publication that basically follows 3 timelines. So it follows this woman planning a party, I think also the person that the party is being planned for, and then the third one is actually Virginia Woolf, a fictionalized Virginia Woolf perspective, as Virginia Woolf is preparing to write Mrs. Dalloway. So there are supposed to be a bunch of parallels. It is supposed to be gorgeous and beautiful, and I want to read it, but I'm scared to read it because I'm afraid it's going to use a lot of brain power, which is probably a dumb reason to be intimidated by a book. But I kind of always have that fear for classics. I say that in some of my favorite books of all time are classics, but I still get this kind of paralyzing fear of what if I'm too dumb to understand, which is not a good thing, and I shouldn't think that way, and you definitely shouldn't think that way. But still, subconsciously, it's just a fear I have. And so the idea of comparing a classic to a modern version that people think is going to be a classic in the future, and trying to compare them and do all of that internal work on my own does intimidate me a little bit, but I need to stop freaking out. I need to just remember that it is a book, and just 2 books, I guess, and if I don't like them, that's okay. If I don't understand them, that's okay. I can always go back and reread it if I want. And to be so real, someone on the internet has probably done a thorough deep dive of all the crossovers, so if I don't get it, I can always read that later. And also, I just want to say, you can not get something or get something and still not like it. You can understand the point of a piece of media and still not enjoy it. Which is kind of a side tangent, but I think that's important to remember just as a society. Even if I do understand it, I might not think it's a masterpiece, and that's okay. The next book up is also a classic, and that is going to be Player Piano by Kurt Vonnegut. So Vonnegut is one of my favorite authors. Specifically, to be more specific, Slaughterhouse-Five is probably my favorite book, if not one of my favorite books. I have a tattoo for it. I love Slaughterhouse-Five. It was just really impactful to me when I read it. But I, since then, have kind of been I'm going to read all of Vonnegut's books. I will find one that I like. I will find other ones, because if he can write Slaughterhouse-Five, I bet his other books are good. And then I read Cat's Cradle. There's an airplane. That's unfortunate. Anyways, then I read Cat's Cradle, and I didn't love it. I thought, Vonnegut's writing was good, the humor was good, and I even liked the plot, but there were times where I was ooh, you shouldn't say that about people. This is not good. Which, it was written in 1960s, doesn't make it okay, no, but, it was written by a man in the 1960s, and so there are parts where I'm like, ooh, yikes. So I did not love Cat's Cradle. And Player Piano, I don't know if it will have any of those things. This is Vonnegut's first novel, and it follows a main character named Paul, who is an engineer in this futuristic world. Future for Vonnegut, not like in the way we think sci-fi. But basically he has to live in this world that has become dominated by a supercomputer, and it's just kind of like him trying to find his way. As most Vonnegut novels are, I probably assume it'll probably end up sad, like most Vonnegut novels. But I actually started this last year. I read like 50 pages. There wasn't like, in those 50 pages, there wasn't anything like, yikes, I shouldn't keep reading this. I just wasn't in the mood. There's a lot of conversation about like robots and AI replacing people and like jobs and stuff, and I was getting sad. So I was like, I don't want to read this. So I stopped, but I want to finish it because right now I'm like, I should still read all of his work. Like I should do it. I don't know if I'll keep that goal, but right now it is still a goal. So I want to finish that. But I'm scared of it because I don't know, I'm just concerned because Slaughterhouse-Five is like so good to me. And I'm just afraid that I will never find something like that again. Which is sad to think about. Speaking of sad, the next book is I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. This is Maya Angelou's memoir, and it is so good. I also started this. I read like 60 pages of it, and then I soft DNF'd it because I had cried within those 60 pages like 3 times. And I was like, I can't deal with this right now. I'm emotionally unstable. So I stopped reading it, but I want to go back to it because it is gorgeous. Maya Angelou can write. She just experienced so many things that were so sad, and like no one should have to go through them. But she did, and so, you know, I'm gonna read it because she is a beautiful writer, and from what I know about her, a beautiful human. I do just want to say, this is kind of true for every book ever. You should always check trigger warnings, but especially for this book. This book is super heavy, so if you should check your trigger warnings for it. The next book up is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. So this is the shortest book on this whole list. It is pretty short. It's like a little over 200 pages, I think. And basically, we follow Piranesi, who is living in his house. I think it's like a labyrinth, pretty much. It's ever-changing, very labyrinth-coded. There's like this one other creature in there that, according to the back, they refer to as the Other, who like sometimes visits Piranesi. And then it's about Piranesi, I think, discovering that there's like a third person in there, and then all of that. From what I have heard, it is kind of like journal entries, and it doesn't make sense until the very end, which is a little intimidating to me. Not because, like, I'm okay with not knowing something until the end, or even maybe not knowing something at the end. Like, some ambiguous endings can be good. But in fantasy novels, I tend to like to know, like, the boundaries of what exists and what doesn't. And I don't really know if this is going to explain anything at all. Kind of based off of what everyone tells me about this book, they're like, don't know anything, just go in just for vibes. Which I love a good vibe book. I love, like, The Night Circus, so good. But, yeah, I do still like to kind of know the limitations of the world. But I'm going to try to go into it with, like, the vibe of mythology, which I don't know if it is. It looks like it is inspired by mythology, but I don't know if that is true. But I'm going to go in with the vibes of, like, you know, kind of just whatever the author thinks is cool works, which tends to be the truth in mythology. So that's what we're thinking. Now we're going to kind of leave the smaller books and go into, like, regular size novels. I mean, some of these are still novel length, but these aren't massive books. These next books are going to get into that, like, 300 to 500 range. And we're going to start with Dune by Frank Herbert. This book is a sci-fi classic. Everyone loves this book. Well, not everyone. A lot of people love this book. I have not read the book or watched the movies. So my knowledge of it is very minimal, probably in comparison to yours. But it takes place on a desert planet. And we follow the story of Paul Atreides, who is the main character, and kind of as he becomes like this big important political figure, possibly religious figure, but within his world. I have owned this book for 4 years. I have not read it in 4 years. And that is because it scares me. It's not huge. I mean, it's, it's bigger than those books, but it's like the normal size of a novel. What scares me about it is that I haven't read a lot of classic sci-fi. I've read a lot of classic fantasy, and I've read a lot of modern sci-fi, but I haven't read a lot of classic sci-fi, so I'm a little scared that I'm not going to understand what's going on. But you know what? That's okay. I can still read it. I can take what I want to learn. I can pocket that. I can leave whatever I don't understand. I'm also scared because a lot of people that I know in real life really love this book, so if I don't love it, I'm like, they're gonna hate me. Not that they would. I don't keep people in my life that would just, like, despise me for not enjoying a book that they liked, but, internal fears. But, yeah, I will eventually read it, probably within the next 4 years. That's a little overdramatic. Hopefully it's sooner than that, but I've owned it for 4 years and haven't touched it, so, there's that, too. The next book is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. This is another very popular book, also a start to a series. This is a start to a trilogy. There are like 300 bajillion Dune books, so there's that. But the thing about The Fifth Season and kind of the whole Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin that scares me is that everyone loves N.K. Jemisin, and if I don't love this book, I don't want to be the only person in the world who is like, no. And I'm not saying I will. Like, I don't think I will hate this book. I just am not a huge dystopian reader, and from what I know about this book, which I guess I should give you a little blurb, but the back is giving nothing, so I'm just kind of going off of what I've heard people talk about it. But basically, we follow a few different characters as they live within the world that is going through its 5th season. So these seasons kind of are like, each of them are like disastrous events. And yeah, that's what's happening. I know it's dystopian world and everything's falling apart. And I tend not to be a fan of dystopian books. But I've only heard good things about this, even from people I know who don't normally like dystopian books, so hopefully I like it. And if I do, that'll be great, because there are 2 more books. Yeah, total of 3. If I don't, it will be less great, because there are 2 more books, but I can just not read them. I need to accept that it's okay to sometimes not finish series. The next book is pure excitement for me, and that is why I keep putting it off. I pre-ordered this book when it got translated to English. Everything about this book speaks to me, and I'm scared to read it, because what if I don't like it? What if I have built up all this imaginary hype in my brain for this book that I've heard no one talk about? And what if it's all in my brain, And so that is going to be Honeybees and Distant Thunder by Riku Unda, and it was translated by Philip Gabriel. So this book basically, it was translated from Japanese to English, and it takes place in a small coastal town in Japan, where these 3 students, well, there are more students, but we follow 3 students as they're taking place in this really prestigious piano competition over a course of 2 weeks. And I like books with music. I have no musical talent, very sadly, because I love music, but no musical talent. I used to play the piano. I wasn't good, but I played. But recently I have finished Light from Uncommon Stars, which is a sci-fi book, but one of the big themes throughout it is music. They play the violin in there. And the conversations about music were so good. And since reading that, I'm I want more books where music is relevant. And so that has built up even more hype from this book. Like, I was already excited, and then reading that made me even more excited, even though there's, like, no crossover. There's no similarities besides the fact that there are characters that play a musical instrument. So there's that, I guess. But anyways, I really want to read this book. I have, like, built up all this hype in my brain about it. And I even, like, told my boyfriend about it, and I, like, want to read it together. And I'm just scared, like, what if I built up this hype for both me and for him, and then it ends up being bad? Once again, none of these books am I expecting to be bad. It is just, like, this paralyzing fear that, like, what if I don't like it? What if I spent my money on this book, and I have dedicated all this time, and then it ends up being bad? That's so scary. This is why I normally read from the library. But, you know, sometimes I just buy books because I want to. Okay, the next books we're going to get into kind of the bigger books. So we will start with kind of, this is bigger than those books but smaller than the next stack, and that is Kaikeyi by Vaishnavi Patel. This is a retelling of Kaikeyi's story, which is within the Ramayana, and it's like a feminist retelling of Kaikeyi's story. I bought this book as soon as it came out. I really want to read it. I have only heard good things about this book, and I have, like, heard excerpts from the book, and they are gorgeous. Like, it sounds so good, but I'm scared. And I'm scared because every mythological retelling book that I have read, I have not liked as much as the original. I don't know why. And I'm not saying I've read, like, a bajillion. Like, I've read a few. And every single one that I've read, I don't know, they just haven't hit me as impactful as the original one did. But the thing about this book is I have heard that this book stands great, like, separate from the Ramayana. Like, this alone is really powerful. And so I really want to read it. I have only heard good things, and I hope that I enjoy it. Like, I hope that I love it. And I do think I will. I've just, like, kind of psyched myself out. Like, there are a few other retellings that I own. Not all of them are, some of them are, like, fairy tale retellings. But I don't know, I've just, like, psyched myself out from reading any of them because I'm scared that I'm just not gonna like them. Which is, like, probably a really bad take because I've only read, like, 3, I think, off the top of my head. And just none of them have hit. But I need to get over that. I need to stop being such a baby and get over it. Oh, I'm dropping things. The next book is intimidating because it's massive. Why is a book this big? In what world do there need to be 2 books that are this large? Because this is The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon, and then A Day of Fallen Night, which is the prequel to this book, is just as big. They are massive books. They are epic fantasy stories. They follow, like, multiple characters as their lives kind of intertwine. I've heard they're feminist. I have heard that there's, like, queer representation in them. I've also heard specifically, like, within that queer representation, I've heard that there's aro representation, which makes me, I think it's aro ace. But once again, I don't know, I haven't read it. I've heard both. Like, I've heard people say there's aro representation. I've heard people say there's ace representation. It could be the same character, they could be different characters. I don't even know if that's, like, true within the text or just, like, a headcanon that people I know have. But yeah, I have heard all of these things, which only excites me for it. Like, I love queer books, I love aro ace representation, I love fantasy books, and I love feminist books. I love women. So, like, you know, I should be very excited about this book, and I am, in theory, until I see this on my shelf. And then I never want to pick it up, because in what world does a book need to be this big? Now, most people I know a few people who didn't love it, but most people I know who have read this think it is worth every single page. I don't know, that's a lot of pages. And the only audiobook for it, for Priory, is on Audible, which I'm not getting an Audible account. And so I'm gonna have to read it with my eyeballs, which is fine. Like, I read books with my eyeballs. But it's just, like, really intimidating looking at, like, because I'm gonna have to hold this. That's a lot. That's a lot of work. But yeah, there's that. And then the last book, oh, it's falling, is still a big book. It is smaller than Priory, though, and that is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. So this book is kind of a family saga that follows two different families, and kind of as their lives intertwine, it takes place in Northern California. It is a classic book. It is kind of considered to be Steinbeck's magnum opus. And I am really excited to read it. I love books that have generational family sagas. Like, I love family stories, and I love like timelines where two things overlap, if you can't tell from the amount of books in this stack that were multiple timelines. But what scares me about it is that what if I don't like it? You know, like, this is one of the classics, which I've read quite a few classics. There are quite a few classics I have read that I've given 5 stars that I love. But this is, like, a classic that in my brain, this was written for me. There's, like, 2 timelines. There are family sagas. Well, I guess there are more than 2 timelines, but there are, like, 2 families, and we follow multiple generations within that family. There's biblical allegories. It is, like, in theory, should be a perfect book for me. And that scares me, because what if I don't like it? If you can't tell, most of my fear roots from fear that I spent my money on a thing I don't like. I'm gonna be very real. And you might be asking why I don't use my library. I do use my library. I would say probably 75% of the books I read are from my library. However, if I think that I am going to love a book enough to annotate it, which most of these books are books I either think I was going to love enough to annotate, or they're going to be something like, which I do think I will like Dune when I read it, but like, for example, Dune, I'm going to want to annotate it to like get all of the deeper meanings. So if I think I'm going to want to annotate a book, I tend to purchase a copy if I can afford it. But yeah, most of my reading comes from my library. If you have a good library system near you, you should do the same. Even if you don't have a good library system near you, you should still get a library card and then just do whatever you need to do. But library cards greatly help local libraries. But yeah, these are sorry, that was like a whole tangent. Anyways, these are the 10 books that I am intimidated to read that I own. And eventually, I will get to them. Eventually, they will be read. I couldn't tell you when, but they will. Thank you for hanging out with me, and I hope that you found a book that piqued your interest. Let me know down below what book you own that you're scared to read. Once again, it could be because of the size, it could be because of hype that you've built up for it, or any other reason. But yeah, let me know down below, and thanks for hanging out. Bye.